In the chaos of 1944, when the world trembled under the weight of its own destruction, there existed a man who was never meant to be a hero. Private Thomas "Tommy" Hale, 31 years old, a field cook for the British Army's 8th Division, stationed somewhere in southern Italy. He wasn't built for battle. His hands were meant for stirring pots, not holding rifles. His war was against hunger, not the Germans. But as he would soon learn, war doesn't ask what you were trained for. It finds everyone. The camp sat between the ruins of an old olive grove. Shells had turned the trees into black skeletons. The soldiers called it Hell's Kitchen, though it wasn't because of Tommy's food. Each dawn began with mud, noise, and exhaustion. Tommy rose before the others, lighting his stove while artillery echoed in the distance. He joked to himself, "Breakfast before bombardment." The other soldiers liked him, mostly because he never complained and always had something warm ready when they came back from patrol. But they also laughed at him. At his clumsiness, his thick accent, his endless optimism. Once, when Tommy accidentally spilled stew on the sergeant's boots, the man barked, "Bloody cook! You'll kill more men with soup than the Germans ever will." Tommy just smiled. "Only if it's undercooked, sir." At night, when laughter faded and silence crept in, Tommy often stayed behind, tinkering with old scrap metal. Pots, lids, tin trays, anything he could find. One night, his friend Corporal Mason walked in and stared at the strange contraption Tommy was wearing. A chest plate made from 2 kitchen lids tied with rope. "What on earth is that supposed to be?" Mason laughed. "Armor," Tommy said proudly. "The finest protection British kitchens can offer." Mason chuckled. "You planning to fight with a ladle?" Tommy grinned. "You never know. Might come in handy." It was a silly thing, the kind of nonsense only someone far from home and terrified of dying could find comfort in. But for Tommy, it was something tangible, something he could do against a war he couldn't control. That night, as wind rattled the tent and artillery whispered in the distance, he whispered a quiet prayer. He didn't pray for victory, just to survive one more sunrise. The morning arrived wrapped in smoke and dust. The Germans had launched a counterattack. The distant thunder of guns rolled closer and closer until the earth itself began to tremble beneath their boots. Tommy was stirring soup when the first shell landed 100 yards away. The pot jumped, the ladle clattered to the ground, and within seconds, another explosion. The rear was no longer the rear. The front had moved fast and merciless. "Down!" shouted Mason. The men dove into ditches as shrapnel tore through the tents. The once lively kitchen became a shredded graveyard of pots and food. Smoke mixed with the smell of burning oil and onions. Tommy crawled under a table, clutching his helmet, heart hammering. He'd heard the stories. Cooks caught in crossfire, medics bombed out of their stations. But it had always felt distant. Not today. When the shelling paused, Tommy peeked outside. The valley beyond the olive trees was chaos. British infantry scrambling, smoke plumes, the whistle of bullets. Mason shouted over the noise, "We're pulling back, Hale!" "Come on!" Tommy hesitated. He looked at the rows of wounded men lying under torn canvas nearby, some groaning, some crying for water. He shook his head. "If I leave now, they'll have nothing to eat." "I can't. For God's sake, Tommy, this isn't about soup." "No," he said quietly. "It's about them." He ran back into the kitchen tent, grabbed a large pot of soup, and began pouring it into smaller containers. Then he looked at his pile of metal scraps, his ridiculous armor. "Guess it's time to test the craftsmanship," he muttered. He strapped the pot lid across his chest with rope and belts, fastened oven plates across his stomach, and even wedged a small pan into the back of his uniform. The mirror in the tent showed a strange reflection, a man halfway between a soldier and a jester. When he stepped outside, the soldiers burst out laughing. "Look at the chef." "Hail the tinman." "Oi, where's your spatula rifle, mate?" Tommy smirked through his fear. "Laugh all you like. This baby's bulletproof." He could feel his pulse pounding beneath the metal, every beat reminding him of what he was risking. But he walked forward anyway, clutching the soup pot like a lifeline. Behind him, the camp burned. Ahead, the battlefield waited. The shelling had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse, tense, heavy, expectant. The men whispered warnings, Sniper! He's out there somewhere. Ridgeline. A single shot cracked in the distance. One man dropped instantly. Another shot. The camp froze. No one dared move. Tommy crouched behind a crate, holding his pot of soup. He could see the medical tent 50 yards away, where the wounded were waiting. He swallowed hard. Just 50 yards, he whispered. You can do that. He stepped out slowly, every sound amplified, the crunch of dirt under his boots, the trembling of the pot in his hands. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then crack! A shot tore through the air and struck his chest. The impact knocked him backward. The pot flew from his hands, soup spilling like blood across the dirt. The men shouted, "Hale's hit!" He gasped, clutching his chest, waiting for the pain. But there was none. He looked down. The bullet had struck the pot lid strapped to his torso, leaving a deep, smoking dent right over his heart. He was alive. The soldiers stared in disbelief. Mason ran to him. "Bloody hell, Tommy. Are you—" Tommy cut him off, voice shaking. I just invented soup-proof armor. Laughter, shock, relief, all at once. But it didn't last. Another bullet cracked, ricocheting off a crate nearby. The sniper was still watching. Tommy crawled behind cover, breathing hard. His ears rang, his heart thundered. Then he spotted something, a glint of light, far off on the ridge. The sniper's scope, he pointed. "Up there!" "Burned tree, right side of the hill." A mortar crew adjusted their aim. Tommy gave the signal, handshaking, eyes fixed on the ridge. "Fire!" The shell arced through the sky and exploded right where the glint had been. A burst of dirt, smoke, then silence. No more shots came. The sniper was gone. Tommy leaned back, staring at the sky, chest still aching from the impact. Around him the soldiers stood speechless. One whispered, "The cook just saved the camp." Tommy laughed weakly. "All in a day's work, lads." But as he sat there, staring at the dented pot, he realized how close death had come, just 1 inch between life and nothing. By evening, word had spread across the entire division. The cook stopped a bullet. The soup pot saved his life. The sniper's gone, thanks to Hale. Tommy sat by the fire, armor still strapped to him, dent gleaming in the flames. He was sore, bruised, shaken, but alive. Officers came by asking questions, examining the pot like it was treasure. One captain laughed. "You may have just saved half the unit with kitchenware, Private." Tommy shrugged. "Guess I'll need a new lid," Mason grinned. "You'll need a medal, you mean?" That night, for the first time in months, laughter in the camp wasn't nervous or hollow. It was pure. The soldiers raised their cups of soup and toasted him. "To the armor that feeds and saves." Tommy tried to laugh with them, but inside something was different. He'd felt fear like never before, the sharp, cold kind that freezes your veins. And he'd learned something too, that courage isn't loud. It's not about charging into battle. Sometimes, courage is just refusing to run when everything inside you screams to. As the firelight danced, Tommy looked at the dented pot beside him. He touched it gently and whispered, "You and me, old friend." We made it. When morning came, the battalion moved on. Tommy kept his pot, battered, blackened and holy in its own strange way. Months later, the war began to turn. The Allies pushed north, and Hale's story traveled with them. By the time they reached Florence, everyone in the regiment knew his name. The cook who stopped a bullet. Some said the bullet had ricocheted off a spoon. Others claimed he'd fought the sniper himself. But the truth was simpler and braver. A man too humble to call himself a hero had saved his comrades by just doing his job. When the battalion commander heard the story, he requested the soup pot for headquarters. Tommy protested. "That pot's done more for morale than your entire officers' club." They promised to return it, and they did months later, with a small brass plate engraved. "For gallantry under fire, Private Thomas Hale, 8th Division." After the war, Tommy returned to London. He opened a small cafe on a quiet street and called it the Lucky Ladle. On the wall above the counter hung the dented pot, polished, framed, eternal. People would come in just to see it. "Is it true?" they'd ask. Tommy would smile. "Aye, it's true. Saved my heart and my stew, both at once." He never sought fame or fortune. He cooked, he laughed, he lived quietly. But every night before closing, he'd wipe the old pot with a cloth and whisper, "Still here, aren't we?" Years later, the artifact was donated to a small regimental museum. Visitors would pass by it, puzzled at first, until they read the plaque, "Improvised Armor, Private T. Hale. Italy, 1944, a cook's pot that stopped a sniper's bullet." Most would chuckle and move on. But those who truly understood war, the veterans, the soldiers, the ones who'd seen death's randomness, they always stopped a little longer. Because they knew what that dent meant. It wasn't just metal bent by impact. It was the shape of courage, imperfect, absurd, and real. Historians still argue whether Hale's story was entirely true or embellished over time. But among those who served with him, the story was never in doubt. To them, he was proof that even in war's madness, humor and humanity could survive. In a world built on destruction, a man had built armor out of hope and lived. As one of his comrades later wrote in his memoir, "Courage isn't just pulling the trigger. Sometimes it's stirring the soup while the bullets fly and believing it still matters." And so, when people laughed at the cook's soup pot armor, they were laughing at something they didn't yet understand. Because true courage often looks ridiculous until it saves a life.